Recently, I ranked every habitat animal in Planet Zoo based on the theoretical pros and cons of each species. But theory isn't the whole story, is it? Does my ranking of the best and worst actually hold up in game? I'm not so sure. Today I'm putting my tier list to the test. I'm opening 2 brand new franchise zoos, one with the top 10 species from my ranking and one with the worst 10. Same rules, same budget, same goals. Let's see if the very best can really carry a zoo and if the worst can completely destroy it. To keep everything nice and fair, there are a few rules. No marketing first of all to inflate guest numbers, and no custom barriers. Custom barriers are way cheaper than the in-game ones for maintenance, so I'm not allowing those. Other than that, both zoos get the best strategy possible, so great habitat visibility, loads of donation bins, high education, and I will be trying to selectively breed animals to get better outcomes from breeding. I'll also be running both zoos for exactly 100 years, covering at least one full life cycle for all 20 animals. That's the plan anyway. Here's what animals we'll be dealing with. Going into our top 10 zoo, most of these animals were already featured in my previous video. First is the Galapagos giant tortoise. Next there was 5 species, all came in second place. That's the African spurred tortoise, black and white rough lemur, North Island brown kiwi, quokka and red crown crane. For the last 4 to get us up to the 10, this was a problem because there was about 20 animals achieved third place in the ranking, so I had to go back and reassess all of them to figure out which 4 were the standout species from those. From that analysis, joining the top 10 zoo, please welcome the Aldabra giant tortoise, ring-tailed lemur, little penguin and the alpaca. For the worst 10, Arctic wolf came out on the very bottom of the ranking, closely followed by the African wild dog and the timber wolf earning second to last place. So all 3 of those will be featured in this challenge. I then had to reassess to find the next 7 poor performers, since again there was a whole bunch of animals equally earned themselves third and fourth to last place. Reassessing all of those, joining the poor performer zoo is the honey badger, ocelot, dingo, dhole, coyote, cougar, and last but not least, the species I think once you account for all the headaches I'll be going through in a franchise zoo, it's the polar bear. So yeah, that's the 20 animals I'll be working with. Top 10, bottom 10. Let's see how we get on. Starting with the best zoo, since I want to ease into this challenge, and I think the better species will be an easier run than the difficult one. Given this is franchise mode though, we are starting on $40,000 in the bank. However, credit-wise, yeah, we've got a lot more credits. Credits are shared across your franchise zoos, and since we are 6+ years into Planet Zoo by this point, I've played a lot of franchise games to date, and I've accumulated credits from those. I'm not throwing them all away just for a challenge run, so I'll be tallying them up from this starting point, and we'll see how much we earn across the zoos from that. For placing the 10 species in the zoo, I am being strategic with this, putting the easier animals in first. So for this zoo, that's starting with the Galapagos giant tortoise. There'll be a decent draw to pull in more guests early doors, they don't cost all that much to maintain, and they take up very little space, so I'm not having to place down an additional power source right out the gate. Next is the African spurred tortoise. Again, I'm sticking to my theory that tortoises are the very best animals you can place in your zoo. So far, I'm not wrong. Even this early on, we've got a decent amount of guests, and the Galapagos tortoises have already had their first set of offspring that will be drawing in many more guests to the zoo. For some reason, they love babies. Next animal, the plan was to add both lemurs in a combined habitat because lemurs are a massive draw for some reason. Ran into problems with that though because there's not many lemurs on the market, at least not females anyway. 20+ males at any given time, all going for stupid prices. So I built the habitat but abandoned the idea of populating it yet and moved on to the North Island brown kiwi. Kiwis are great, much like the tortoises, to own and operate. They just don't live nearly as long and they don't have quite as many offspring per pregnancy. Still no luck with a full set of lemurs. I moved on to the quokka. Now quokkas needed a much bigger habitat, that is if I wanted a full set of them. This is what I would call the first medium to large size habitat I've put in the zoo, and we're finally getting to the point where I need to start thinking about another electricity source, which is going to add more running costs to the zoo. Finally, after around 7 years looking in the trade market and checking availability of animals, I finally had a decent amount of both lemurs that could go in. Couldn't source a full set of females to go in. I think that's around 20 or 30. I believe I started with around 10 to 15, and that was enough to have a decent breeding group going. What happened next was a bit chaotic. soon as the lemurs went in, guest numbers quite literally exploded. We doubled from around 1,000 guests to 2,000. People really like lemurs. That gave me problems with the pathing though. I honestly thought paths I made would be plenty wide enough considering we're only having 10 species in the zoo in total. But yeah, this is what I was now dealing with. Positive is more guests means more profit, so finances looking very healthy at this point. Next animal's the Aldabra giant tortoise, and figured I'd do the same as before. It's a carbon copy of the other tortoise habitats. They need pretty much the same environment, so why not? With that, there's just 3 species left to go, and we are onto some more difficult animals. My ranking viewed big groups that could mass produce offspring as favourable, so fair's fair, I had to have a few animals in here that would mass produce in big groups. Started off that portion of the zoo with the red crown crane. Big numbers required a big habitat, so it's a good job you can have these as a walkthrough, otherwise the guests wouldn't really be getting a good view. Since I was sourcing a large group of cranes on the trade market, was running into the same issue I had with the lemurs. Availability on the trade market is problematic when you need big numbers of animals to start off. Sourcing enough cranes to give this a decent go was taking a really long time, so I moved on to build the last 2 habitats for the little penguin and the alpaca. Again, both of these are quite large habitats, and yes, by this point I'd needed 2 additional sources of power on either side of those habitats, plus a couple of water treatment plants for the little penguin and the red crown crane on the opposite side of the zoo. Finally built up enough cranes to release them into the zoo, and I'll be honest, they're not anything out of this world. They're okay, but there wasn't a huge leap in guest numbers like there was when I put the lemurs in, and they took a lot of micromanagement for selective breeding. Being monogamous, they'll only pair with one other crane, and I wanted to make sure that I had cranes with good genetics breeding with other cranes that also had good genetics. Since I was struggling to find any cranes in the trade market, I was just making do with ones that had good and bad genetics, and that created a massive management problem and has me questioning whether they're even worth it because of that. Anyway, that was the cranes ticked off the list. Next it was on to the alpacas. Boy, the alpacas. 2 problems here I wasn't aware of before positioning them in my ranking. First, they can't be released into the wild for credits because they're domesticated. While that isn't a deal breaker on its own, alpacas are rarely available on the trade market, and as I played more, it became clear that trade market popularity is a bigger priority in a franchise sim. Second problem, I gave alpacas an extra point for guest interaction, but this playthrough has showed me that interactivity has no impact on guest numbers or donations, so that point wasn't justified. I still maintain that walkthrough habitats attract more guests, but guest interactivity is a purely fun side feature with no gameplay impact. That brought us to the final animal going into the top 10 zoo, and yeah, this was the worst of all, unfortunately, the little penguin. You need a lot of them first of all, so similar to with the cranes, you've got problems there of sourcing them on the market, then you've got to split them up because they're monogamous if you don't want them pairing up with unsuitable mates. They also have a very short lifespan, so no sooner are you putting them in the zoo than you're having to replace them. But this was a test of the rankings, and that is all 10 of the top 10 zoo species gone in. So no more building in this zoo, just waiting it out for the next 86 years, replacing animals when needed and selling additionals on the market or releasing for credits, and let's see what that tops out at in terms of profit at the 100-year mark. I'll get to the results of that later in this video. Next we need to redo this with a fresh franchise zoo for the worst 10 species. Okay, it's time for the worst zoo, and I'm really hoping that this little test here can prove my ranking wrong. I really like some of the animals I'm putting in here. Going by the comments on my previous video, I'm starting with the Timberwolf because many people assured me that starting with a Timberwolf isn't a death sentence for the zoo. Hoping that's right, but I am already struggling with the amount of space they need, first of all. We also likely don't have enough cash to feed a whole pack this early on, so playing it safe with just 2 of them for now so that they can get breeding. Positive news is they're not bringing in as many guests as the tortoises did in the first zoo, but it's not a big difference. Around 15 less guests for the Timberwolves than the tortoises. Problem is they're already costing more. Animal 2 going in, it's the honey badger. Gone with a species that's not going to cost me an arm and a leg to maintain. That said, they need a massive amount of space. I mean, look at the size of the honey badger. Why does it need all this room? That's ridiculous. Ready for animal number 3. This habitat will be for the ocelot. Already purchased some decent quality ocelots on the market. Plenty of those available at least. They must be a popular choice for other players, and that's a good sign. On the flip side, at this stage we're matching pretty even for guest numbers compared to the top 10 zoo, but we're rapidly falling behind in terms of cost, and that's certainly the more expensive food cost that's causing this. I'm avoiding bankruptcy though by just being careful and avoiding the temptation to expand too quickly. This zoo demands a bit more patience. Animal number 4 is the dingo. I had to create this massive habitat for them, and having a few problems with the dingoes. They keep glitching out a little bit and getting stuck, so I keep having to come back and move them. A bit worried about that in case it's going to impact their breeding cycle or something. Prepping for animal 5, which is the dhole. They need so much space for a decent pack size. I'm very slightly breaking one of my self-imposed rules. For these small animals that need a very large enclosure, to ensure guest visibility, I'm creating a very small section of custom-made barrier. I know I said I wasn't going to allow that, but this isn't to avoid maintenance cost. It's purely so I can run a path down the middle with a bridge over it that connects the two sides of the habitat, and that'll keep the habitat size for the animals, but has a well-connected path for guests to walk down. I'm still using in-game barrier for the rest of the habitat, and it's such a small section here, it's not going to make a big difference in terms of maintenance costs. The sheer size of these big habitats is still going to keep my mechanics constantly busy, but it feels a bit more fair to be doing what I can to increase visibility, so we don't get unhappy guests that refuse to donate because they can't see animals very well. This feels more fair. I've used the same technique for number 6, the African wild dog, and I'm hoping this encourages a few more donations. We are still struggling on the money side of things in this zoo. For comparison, by the time we added the 6th animal in the top 10 zoo, we had about 18,000 visitors, and we'd amassed over 100,000 in profit. Here, we're now trailing on both fronts, unfortunately. We've got less than half that amount in guests, and we're just scraping by financially with 8,500 in the bank. I have to save up to add every new species, and I can't fill the habitats to the capacity I want to give them a decent sized pack yet. We simply can't afford the extra animals. Right, I've saved up. Time to add the Arctic wolf finally, and gradually adding more animals to each habitat as we've got the money to, and that's starting to help boost up the donations slightly. So on a roll, we're straight on to animal number 8, and that's the coyote. That's the last of the canines in, just 2 more animals to go. Taking my time with this one. For a long time, this was my number 1 favourite animal in the game. It's the cougar. They're such a great addition to the game in so many ways. I was so sad to see them at the bottom of my ranking. Hey ho, it's the maintenance cost that's doing it. In every other aspect, I'd say these are a reasonable choice. This brings us to animal number 10. Deliberately left this difficult customer to the end, the polar bear. We've got a vastly huge habitat here, so applied the same technique with the bridge splitting it in 2. Very necessary here with the sheer size of the habitat for the polar bears. So here we go. Cost me 20,000 credits too to purchase a decent pair on the market. Hope they're worth it. Time will tell. Like with the top 10 zoo, I now need to let this zoo run on until we hit 100 years. Long time, but that's the only way to do a fair comparison between the two. So I've played both zoos on to exactly 100 years. It took 2 real life weeks to get here on account of me having a full-time job outside of YouTube. It was a long and in some cases quite arduous process, but now I have definitive results. As expected, the top 10 zoo performed far better than the worst 10 in terms of both guest numbers and profit. We've had over double the number of guests in the best zoo and 9.1 million more in profit. Even the big draw of the polar bears couldn't even out the numbers enough. There was a few surprises in the figures though. Guest spending in the worst zoo was higher than the best. It just wasn't enough to cover the additional upkeep costs. Total visitors across the 100 years was interesting too. Total for the best zoo was almost 160,000, whereas the worst zoo saw only 76,000 through the gates. As a side note, in terms of credits, neither zoo performed well in that regard. Either most of the animals I placed in both zoos are useless at earning credits, or my credit strategy just sucks. All said, I ended up 31,000 credits down for the best zoo, and around 15,000 credits down for the worst zoo. Not sure I can entirely blame the animals for that though, it could just be me. Figuring out a reliable credit strategy is next on my list of videos to make. I will figure it out and share my results. So, big question, did these results change my opinion of my every animal ranking? Yeah, actually, quite a bit. The worst zoo held up far better than I expected. Taking your time, placing less profitable animals won't tank your zoo unless you overspend early. The only danger with that is starting with animals that cost the most to maintain, like the polar bears. Save those big impact animals for later. Start with the more manageable ones. And yes, something that was talked about a lot in the comments of that ranking video was about all of those canines being right at the bottom. Having placed quite a few of them now in a functional working zoo, to answer the question, can you start with canines? I would say absolutely. They're more work to manage. You might not be able to get more than a few of them at the start, but financially there's no reason why they can't work from day one. For a comparison, my opinion now of some of the animals that placed near the top of the ranking, they did bring in the numbers to make a huge profit, you can't argue with that, but some of them also took far more micromanagement than the worst zoo animals. The little penguins and the quokka, for example, were constant work, so I would say be very careful with short lifespan animals. Sometimes they're not worth it. I found once I was managing over 100 plus animals in the zoo, the game turned into notification hell. Births, deaths, inbreeding checks non-stop, and for me, it just drained the fun. Final thought on the ranking, the canines definitely deserve to be higher up than they are, and I'd move the animals with a short lifespan or those that rely on 20 plus animals to be profitable down. They take too much work. That and the polar bear. Sorry, the polar bear is the worst. With their massive habitat, which incidentally they only use about 20% of. The huge upkeep costs and the ridiculous prices in the trade market, it has them sucking big time, sorry. That said, they made me laugh the most playing this zoo. The adults kept jumping onto the top of the hard shelter, and it is so funny why they were doing this. It was basically to use the bathroom. They get up on here and do their business just to watch gravity fling it off the shelter. So funny. I didn't manage to catch it on video, but when they were doing this on the other side, it would have it dropping onto the guests or into the donation bin. So I'm assuming polar bear's opinion of me is the same as my opinion of them. Anyway, in terms of the top animal, Galapagos giant tortoise is still hands down the best for me. Easy to place, takes barely any management, their life cycle lasts over 100 years, and they can earn decent credits releasing them to the wild since you end up with so many of them over that time. So that's what I found out running this challenge. Hope you found it informative. As always, thanks so much for watching, catch you in the next video.